G'day. I thought I'd start this one with a little bit of Australiana for you. This lesson is called Assignment and Licensing. And you might think, that sounds a bit dreary. But let me tell you, it's actually two really, really important concepts that are essentially going to be your tools when trying to generate income from your musical works. So let's get on with this one. Okay, we're coming up to the end of this module about the legal basis of the music industry. What we're going to launch into next, the next couple of modules, are about publishing and recording. But there's no real reason or no real way you can launch into an understanding of recording contracts and publishing contracts unless you understand these two key concepts, assignment and licensing. Now, these are the tools that lawyers and business people use when dealing in intellectual property, in dealing in trademark and dealing in copyright. They're very, very important. And it may not sound like the most exciting lesson, but trust me, it's going to come back time and time again throughout your career. These are your money-making tools in the music business. All right, so let's talk about two separate things, related but separate, called assignment and licensing. The short version is an assignment is a transfer of ownership, while a license is the giving of permission. Now that's a pretty significant thing when you're talking about your creative works, your life's work. Transfer of ownership of your life's work sounds like a pretty significant step to take. So you should probably take this class really, really seriously. Also, the giving of permission. If you license your work, you're allowing somebody else to use your right to reproduce that work or use that work in relation to a film or a video or an ad or a video game or something like that. You're giving them permission to use your work. So if you don't want to transfer the ownership of your work, if you don't want someone to use your work, you should not be assigning or licensing your work. All right, let's look first at this concept of assignment. An assignment involves the assignor, boring legal word, transferring the ownership of their rights to the assignee. Now, what this results in is that you are no longer the owner of those rights. So if you assign your right of copyright, you're assigning the right to make reproductions of your work. It's no longer your right to make reproductions of the work, it's somebody else's. Now that's pretty serious, and it's not something you should do lightly, and it's certainly not something you should do by accident. So make sure that if you see the word assignment or assign in a contract, that you recognize that there's a fair chance that you're actually transferring the ownership of your work. And that may not be what you want to do. And even if you do, you'd want to be sure you're receiving some pretty significant benefit for that. Now, assignment is different to a normal sale. An assignment is a transfer of ownership, but it can be done bit by bit. It can be done territory by territory. Because you're talking about rights, and rights are, as we've said before in earlier lessons, rights are intangible, you're able to assign your rights territory by territory. You can also assign your rights for a period of time. You can transfer ownership, but it's not forever. It might be forever if that's what you agree to, but you can make an assignment of your rights for a year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever the case may be. And you can do a deal to assign your rights for Australia and New Zealand, for North America, for Europe, for Asia, for South America, for any different territory by territory. Now, this means that your tool of assignment is a very flexible tool. You can transfer the rights in your recordings to one record company in Europe and a different one in Asia. You can transfer your rights to your songs to a publisher for 10 years or 5 years. So it's a different kind of transfer of ownership. You can transfer your ownership in a more flexible and hence a more strategic way. Now, David Bowie is a great example of this. When he did his assignment of rights to his first record company, he said to that record company, okay, I'm prepared to transfer ownership to you of my recordings, but only for 10 years. After that, I want them assigned back to me. And his record company at the time said, sure, David, you're making pop music, no problem, as if we're going to care whether we own your songs 10 years from now. David Bowie was a very smart guy. That reversion of rights was a very important thing. It meant that at the end of that 10 years, those songs returned to him. Now, if he had not even thought about it and just said, all right, the record company wants to own my songs, that's fine, they're giving me a budget to make some recordings or something, fine, they can own the rights forever. That would have been a very short-sighted and a very expensive mistake. Now, he was smart enough and well-advised enough to understand this, and guess what? So are you. You're now well-advised enough to understand that you don't have to transfer the ownership of your work forever, and if you choose not to, you don't have to. It's simple as that. So these assignment clauses are going to look something like this, and this is one from a music publishing agreement. I'll read it to you. Subject to the terms and conditions of this agreement, the writer hereby assigns to the publisher, during the term and the rights period, the whole and entire copyright in each composition throughout all the countries of the territory, absolutely, including but not limited to, etc., etc., etc. Let's break that down so it's very clear what this is doing. You hereby assign to the publisher. You cease to be the owner of the copyright in your songs, and the publisher becomes the owner of the copyright in your songs. For how long? Well, during the term. And you'll notice that that's not a typo. Term is capitalized. It starts with a capital T. That means that somewhere else in the contract, there'll be a definition of what term means. Now, if that term is defined as forever or in perpetuity, you are transferring the ownership of your songs to that publisher forever. You may not want to do that. And throughout all the countries of the territory, if territory is defined as the world or even the universe, and trust me, a lot of contracts say the universe, that means that your rights are being transferred to that company, every country in the world. And if you thought, oh, I thought this was only for North America, you're wrong. So make sure you're clear on both the term and the territory. Very important. Now, it did say, subject to the terms and conditions of this agreement. This is where you are able to trade in your copyright. You might say, okay, I'm happy to transfer the ownership of my songs to a publisher, but I only want to do it if they pay me a royalty. Well, that's fine. You're allowed to negotiate that. You might say, I'm happy to transfer the ownership of my songs to the publisher, but only if they get my consent every time they want to put my song in a film or an ad or a political advertisement or something. So there can be all sorts of conditions attached to the assignment. It doesn't have to be, hey, I've just transferred the ownership of my songs, I'm never going to see them again, and anything that happens to those songs now, I don't have any rights anymore. you can make the transfer of ownership conditional upon them paying you royalties or giving you an advance or whatever it might be. Now, all of those terms and conditions we're going to come back to when we look at recording and publishing contracts. All right, now let's have a look at licensing. Licensing is different. An assignment is a transfer of ownership. A license comes down to one word, and that word is permission. Now, this should not come as a big shock to you. You've all heard the word license. You've got a driver's license or a driver's permit. It allows you to drive a car. If you want to open a bar, you need a liquor license, and that license permits you to sell alcohol at your venue. The giving of permission. It's something that is fairly obvious, and we're familiar with that terminology. But let's put that in the context of licensing your work. When an artist licenses their song or their recording, they are simply giving permission for somebody else to do something with it. So if you license your song to Quentin Tarantino to put in his film, A, you should be pretty happy about that because he's going to pay you a significant amount of money, but B, you still retain ownership of your song. You are only giving him permission. And that's all he wants. He doesn't want to own your song. He's a film director. He doesn't need to own the copyright in your song. He just needs permission to put your song in his film. If you license your recording to a record company, they don't necessarily need to own your recording or the copyright in your recording. All they need is permission to sell and market your recording, or for that matter, if you license, you upload your song to Spotify, you're giving Spotify permission to have your song on their platform in return for you receiving a few pennies should your song get streamed a few times. Spotify doesn't own your song. They don't own the copyright in your work, and even Spotify would never claim that was a good business model. They don't want to own your recording. They simply want to license your recording. They want to license it for public streaming purposes. So a lot of your revenue does not require you to transfer the ownership of your copyright. It simply requires you to license your work. Now, these licenses can take a couple of different forms. You can give exclusive licenses or non-exclusive licenses. So for example, if a big ad agency came to you and said, hey, we want to license your song and your recording to be in a global advertising campaign for a new product, they might, well within their rights, say, okay, we want an exclusive license. We don't want you licensing your song to another advertiser in the same product category or to another advertiser at all. And if they pay you enough money, you might say, sure, you can have an exclusive license. But you would also be kind of unlikely to license your songs to Spotify exclusively because you want to be on all the other platforms. You want to be on Apple Music and Deezer and Pandora and all those other platforms. I think they all still exist. If they do, you want to be on them. There's hundreds of or dozens of streaming platforms around the world, and you don't want to be exclusive to one of them, and you normally wouldn't seek to do that. And unless you're a major artist and they're trying to make quite a big statement, they wouldn't expect you to be exclusive to their platform. So you really need to stop and think what sort of license is appropriate in certain circumstances. Now, none of you woke up this morning with that knowledge embedded into your head. You don't automatically know whether a license should be exclusive or non-exclusive. Sometimes it's got an element of common sense about it, like the Spotify example, but other times it's a matter of bargaining power. If Quentin Tarantino did say to you, I love your song, it's fantastic, but I don't want to see it in any other movie or TV show, you might say, well, I'm happy with that. I'm so excited to be on a Quentin Tarantino movie that I'm prepared to give him an exclusive license. If he wants my song not to appear in any other film or TV show, you might think about giving him an exclusive license. But he'd want to pay a premium to do that. If you want that song not to appear in another production, you're going to have to pay the songwriter and the recording artist a higher fee. So sometimes it's negotiable, sometimes it's obvious, and sometimes you need to get advice to understand what sort of license you should be giving. It's not something that anyone was born knowing, and a lot of this understanding of both assignment and licensing comes from experience, and that's where it's useful to have managers or lawyers or some other advisor that actually has done this a few hundred times before. So these sort of deals are something that you need to educate yourself about as you go along, and this is the starting point of that. When you are giving permission for somebody to use your work, let's say it's a recording, again, you can put limitations on your grant of rights. You can say to Quentin Tarantino, yep, you can use my song for your film, but if you're going to use the song in trailers, you're going to have to pay me more money. Or if you want to use the song for streaming platforms and not just cinema release, you have to pay me more money. And that's the same with advertising or any other use, video games, whatever it might be. You're able to minimize or define the rights that you're giving that particular user of your music. And again, it could be for a period of time. Not too many major films are going to take a 1 or 2 year license for your song to be in their film, because they don't want to have to replace your song, a year from now. That's not really practical. So they will want a perpetual license for that particular use. So all of these different negotiable points, term, territory, and obviously payment, are things that you will be able to negotiate, and we'll look at how some of those things work when we look at recording and synchronization agreements in subsequent weeks. So, in summary, very important lesson, this one. I don't know why we have 2 loaded dice on that slide, but there it is. Very important lesson. We need to understand that an assignment or a license is one of the tools, or really the tools, that you have at your disposal in order to trade in your copyright. This is vitally important. And to understand the difference could be the difference between you giving away your life's work and retaining ownership of it. So it's fairly important that you do understand the difference. All right, so very important, very significant, and hopefully this has all sunk in as I'm been going through this section for you. I strongly suggest that if you are faced with any kind of contract, particularly if you see the word assignment in it or assign, run off and get yourself some legal advice, because the last thing you want to do is give away the ownership of your work without at least negotiating some sort of very significant benefit. So be very careful. Don't sign any document that lands in front of you. All right, we are getting near the end of Module 2. One more class, and I look forward to seeing you in that lesson. Thanks a lot. Bye.